Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to this. My name's Pete Hill. I've spent my life looking at amphibians and reptiles since childhood. That's me with a sand lizard helping out. I think it was Springwatch there. Um, helped set up an amphibian and reptile group in South Wales quite a few years ago. Really proactive bunch of people involved. And after that, I ended up working with Ark, who I work for now. Dug my first pond when I was 8 years old. This is my garden pond now. We get frogs and paramount newts breeding there, and we get occasional grass snakes visiting, which is cool as well. And this is in a very suburban area, so it can be done. Apart from ponds, I spent a lot of time wandering the southern heath. So my father was a Welshman in the army, and he was based down on the border of Surrey and Hampshire. And so I was born down there, and I spent a big part of my childhood tramping around on the southern heath. So you've got all the reptile species there, including smooth snake and sand lizard, and also natterjack toads. So I was in my element down there, and that's where I served my apprenticeship kind of thing. A lot of the time on sunny days when I should have been in school. Anyway, that's the book that was my Bible at the time, Lives of British Lizards. You can get it on Amazon normally. It's out of print long ago. So it's written in the 50s, but the style of it is a bit outdated in some of the sections of it. Now we've got different, more modern methodologies of study. However, his observations of behavior are unsurpassed. He's obviously spent a lot of time out in the field. Actually, he got divorced as a result of it because he spent 7 seasons flat out and looking, surveying this one site, and it didn't go down very well. So, but he recorded his observations, and they're absolutely fascinating. And I was carrying this book around with me as a 9-year-old upwards, and I can concur that all the behaviors he's described, I've also witnessed myself, some of them multiple times now. And it's that's missing in a lot of modern literature, his hands-on experience over time served being amongst the animals. So if you want an interesting read, try that one if you can get hold of it. So I work for ARC, Amphibian and Reptile Conservation. It used to be called the Herpetological Conservation Trust, which is a bit of a mouthful. So we modernized, committed to looking after amphibians and reptiles, which are kind of like the little brown jobs that not a lot of people care about. And we've got a lot of really interesting reserves, mostly down in England. Okay. As well as that, we undertake species reintroduction. So Wales relevant is a natterjack toad on certain North Wales dune sites. You've got the pool frog, that's an English reintroduction in Norfolk. The smooth snake, translocations, reintroductions to Devon and Cornwall. But getting back to being Wales relevant, the sand lizard, as well as English reintroductions, the species was extinct in Wales, probably in 50s and 60s. We're not sure exactly when. And that's been restored now to several different sites. A bit more about that later. Here's one of the sites that we've got sand lizards restored to, doing really well at. This is Ynys above Aberystwyth and Ceredigion, and this is the most southernly situated official reintroduction site of sand lizards. There are others, but we don't know how they got there. This is the official reintroduction site, and as you can see, it's really good habitat, full of reptiles, not just sand lizards. So we're going to be looking at, briefly, the frogs, toads, and newts we have here in the UK, and also we'll take a look at the reptiles, which are lizards and snakes, all the native stuff here. We won't go into too much detail. We'll do that more later on in this series. So later on in the series, we'll discuss the species in more detail. Their ecology, how to better understand them, survey techniques, how to find them. You've got a great crested newt there in the picture in a bottle trap with a biodiversity-aware greenkeeper of a golf course in West Glamorgan. You've got all 3 species of newts using the ponds on the golf course. We'll be talking about how you can record what you've seen in a later presentation in the series 2. Before we talk about the species you're likely to encounter in Port Talbot and surrounding counties, here's the 2 rarities in Wales: the sand lizard, natterjack toad, both previously extinct, both successfully reintroduced at various sites along the North Wales coastline. The sand lizard more southerly. Protected species, you require a license to survey them. So, amphibians. They function according to temperature, so depending how warm it is as to how active they are, and this can vary and fluctuate, okay, which fits in with how the climate is these days. They have permeable skins, which means they can diffuse both liquids and gases through their skin, which is really useful if you want to spend time under the water, even hibernating in some instances under the water. But it's not so good having permeable skin if you have pollutants and toxins around the place. So that's why amphibians are so susceptible to those kind of threats. Amphibians are tied to having to breed in water. They feed mainly on invertebrates. And contrary to popular belief and understandings, they spend the vast majority of their lives on land, not in the water. They're just easier to find when they're in the water. So most people are familiar, I expect you all are, with the classic life cycle of the frog. This is much the same throughout the amphibians. Newts, very, very similar. They're all completely reliant on water to breed in. Common frog, big, muscly legs. You can see that raised part of the back there, which is like an obvious hump because of how the pelvis is shaped, because they've got such big thrusting legs. That's absent in toads. You've got a dark patch behind the eye, immediately behind the eye. Frogs are very varied in color, but this patch is always darker than the ground color. And you can see the eardrum, which is a perfect circle that's impeding there. Okay, that is not visible in toads either. Males also develop natural pads on the thumbs during the breeding season, but you have to get close up and personal to see that, and it's not really an ID thing that I want to get you involved with. Females tend to be bigger. They tend to have a rough surface to their flanks, which might help the males grip them during breeding, but they can be difficult to tell apart. I'm not so sure that's the case, but I'll tell you more about that in the session we have, particularly on frogs. Toads, rough watery skin. Look at the legs, the rear legs, they're nowhere near as powerful as the frogs. And if you look along the back, it hasn't got that obvious raised area by the pelvis that the frog has. No visible eardrum, okay? But the parotid gland, you can see that gland then. You can see the pores in the gland. That's what releases the bufotoxins, which is a mild toxin to put predators off, okay? A couple of toads in a typical situation in leaf litter underneath a log. So newts are the amphibians, a group of amphibians that people just get confused about all the time, and non-stop misidentifications and confused stuff about newts. But to make it easier, I hope, the smooth newt and the palmate newt are very similar. They're in the same genus. You can even get hybrids of them in instances where they're not used to living together and suddenly they're thrown together. They can even hybridize. Great crested newt is a very different animal. It's in a totally different genus. It's nothing like the other 2 animals. Now, the other 2 species. So generally, when you see presentations about newts, they're full of pictures of them in the aquatic phase when it's easy to tell them apart because they've got all these temporary adornments such as crests and tail finnage and adornments on their toes in the case of some species, but that all disappears when they're on the land. So you haven't got that to tell them apart with. And to be honest, newts spend most of the time on the land. It's just people find them easier when they're in the water. So when people find them on the land, there's loads of confusion about what they are. So I'm just going to show you some pictures of them on the land for a change, okay? So these are all smooth newts. They're all the same species. They look very different though, don't they? Don't look the same. Well, you can say the same about people. We haven't all got the same color hair, skin, etc. They're very diverse animals. On the land, their skin appears to be quite velvety. Okay. Great crested newt. There's one on the top left there, big female. Now, look at that skin there. It's definitely warty, granular, yeah? On the right there, there's some underneath a mattress and an industrial estate on the outside of Kenwick, okay? So they're not fussy about what they use terrestrially, as long as it's humid and provides shelter. But that warty skin, that's a key factor, okay? It doesn't say it in the books. I don't know why people get confused about, has it got a crest? Has it got an orange belly? All three species of newt develop crests of some kind. All three species of newts have orange bellies of some kind. Only one of them's got warty skin. The great crested newt, or its other name, the clue's in the name, the warty newt. Okay, so just look at the skin and you can tell within a second whether it's got granular skin or not, or whether it's got smooth skin, such as the smooth newt. Okay, it's pretty easy when you think about it like that and don't get tied up with all the normal stuff about crests and web feet and all that stuff. Has it got warty skin? Yes or no? That simple. Terrestrial newts on land, you can see velvety skin, whilst the great crested newts still got the warty appearance. And the great crested newts always seem to be damper and more shiny and wet, whereas the other species look more velvety and dry. Okay. You can see adult palmate newts there and adolescent great crested newts, and I'm sure you can tell which is which without me having to tell you. The two bigger black animals are the GCN, great crested newts. One shot of them in the water just to show you size comparison. There's a male palmate newt at the bottom, fully grown. There's a male smooth newt at the top, facing right, and there's an adult female great crested newt in the middle. We don't keep them in trays like that for unsupervised for too long, otherwise it would just be one big fat newt. As you can see, that female newt would have no trouble getting that palmate newt down her. In the natural situation of a pond, they can evade each other. In this situation, they couldn't, so don't leave them in a tray like that. But just to show the size difference. And you can also see the outline of her. She's got granular skin. They're really not difficult to confuse once you have actually seen a great crested newt. You won't mistake it for anything else. So habitat requirements for amphibians are pretty simple. They need somewhere to breed. They need water to breed. But whilst based on land, vegetated cover, lots of vegetation, that's what they need. It provides humid resting places, invertebrate food, safe places to hibernate, and of course, connectivity. Now, connectivity is vital. You can get all kinds of local extinctions. A pond might dry out for 2 years on the trot. There might be pollution. There might be a fire which devastates it and then it recovers the habitat, especially in the case of reptiles. So connectivity allows animals to recolonize after disasters like that. All of our amphibians, every species requires water, fresh water to breed in, okay? But depending on the species depends on which kind of aquatic habitat they favor, okay? Toads are very different. They like to use large permanent water bodies, which very often even have fish present. Now, people who've made garden ponds are probably used to being told, oh, we mustn't have fish with amphibians. With garden ponds, yeah, because you're very unlikely to get toads breeding in garden ponds. They prefer bigger water bodies. The amphibians that you are likely to get breeding in ponds do better off without fish. I'll explain a bit more. So in the UK, amphibians vary in their ability to cope with fish. At the top, we've got a common toad, which potentially benefits from living with fish. Then we've got common frog, smooth newt, palmate newt. They don't do so well with where fish are present. They do much better when they're not there, but a percentage does manage to survive the recruitment. Great crested newts at the bottom of the scale, they just can't hack breeding where fish are present. Now, why? Well, the common frog, the smooth newt, and the palmate newt, all their tadpole stages, they spend a lot of time hidden in the mud, deep in vegetation, feeding like that, okay? Keeping out the way. The great crested newt, their larval strategy is turned pelagic. The tadpoles or larvae, whatever you want to call them, they tend to float around in water columns. So suspended about 30 centimeters off or more off the bottom of the pond, floating out in the middle of the pond. And they've even got a specially shaped fin to help them do that. Hang there high in the water column. And it's great for them because they can grab Daphnia and all kinds of freshwater plankton. They just grab it without having to put any effort into it as it floats past. However, if you're floating around in the open water like that, as a soft-bodied amphibian larvae and a fish comes by, you're going to get eaten. So they don't cope with fish. Toads are very different. Toad tadpoles have got slightly toxic skin. They behave differently to frog tadpoles. They swim around in big shoals. A fish will come up, take a mouthful of toad tadpoles, find it distasteful, spit it out, not eat them again. Okay. However, tadpoles' toxic skin, there are predators in the pond that can bypass that toxic skin. So invertebrate predators, such as a long list of odonata larvae, dragonfly and damselfly larvae, beetles and their larvae, water scorpions, there's an endless list of them. They grab the tadpole, pierce its skin, and drain the contents. Okay, so fish predate these invertebrate predators. So fish don't eat the tadpoles of the toad themselves, but they predate invertebrates that predate the tadpoles. So toads are unique. They're the only amphibian species unique in the UK that they actually benefit from living with fish. The others in the middle, they can just about deal with it. Great crested newt can't do it. Newts and lizards regularly mixed up. If you see one on the land, an animal with 4 legs and a tail, okay, like this, if it's slow moving on land, it's probably a newt, or it might be a very poorly lizard. But lizards have clear scaled skin. They've got little claws at the end of the toes, and they're generally much faster moving animals. And you'll see them out in the open rather than hiding in damp environments. Okay. Common lizard, really diverse in appearance. There's a classic looking speckled male on the bottom left. And there's a classic looking stripy female. It's not quite reached full size yet, but there's lots of variation, plenty of variation amongst them. Juveniles, people describe them as being black. They're not, they're just very dark. Sometimes you get melanistic ones and they're black, but generally they're this bronze color. And as they grow, the pattern changes and the color becomes lighter generally. Slow worms, not going to confuse them for another lizard. No legs. So really smooth polished scales. Males are a uniform color all over, as you can see on the left. Females tend to be more beautiful, a bit like humans. Very much dark flanks, demarcation of the flanks compared to the dorsal surface. Very often a vertical stripe, not always, but the demarcation of the dorsal color and the flanks is always really obvious. Juveniles, kind of an exaggerated version of the females. Adder, I'm sure everybody knows what an adder looks like. The zigzag, this is a female, it's a bridge end animal. I can tell she's female because for lots of reasons, but basically she's got a brown zigzag. There's other features as well we'll talk about in a different presentation, but she's got a brown zigzag rather than a black one. There's a classic male. Lots of variety and diversification here too. This is a classic male. Can you notice how he's spreading his body out flat? It's probably a cold morning. He's soaking up the sun and he's spreading himself up to make a bigger surface as possible to get as much UV and heat as he can as quickly as possible. Juveniles tend to be reddish like or brown like the females. Not always the case though. Vertical pupil. Grass snake, different animal entirely. So big round pupils, okay? Olive green generally, quite a little bit of variation. Yellow collar, which sometimes fades in the case of females, but that black collar immediately behind it is always present. People think they're difficult to tell the genders apart. I don't really. I like to look at their heads, okay? This is a big adult female. Females get much bigger than males. Can you see how she's got a big, strong jaw, wide jaw, the muscles on the jaw? She's a big, powerful animal, okay? This particular individual's annoyed. She didn't want us to take a picture of her. She's annoyed. She's pretending to be a cobra, hissing and looking angry. It's all a bluff, but it puts most people off. It doesn't work with me, obviously. But you can see she's got a big, wide, broad jaw. If you were looking at her from above, you wouldn't directly above, you wouldn't see her eyes protruding beyond the jawline. The jawline is big and strong and powerful and wider than her eyes protrude. The male is a runt by comparison. Look at his head, really narrow. If you were looking at him from above, he would have bulging eyes out from either side. Very, very different structure to the female. Okay, there's another male snuggled up beneath him. You can just see below his head, there's another snake there. You'll also notice this animal's got very milky blue eyes. It's because he's just about to slough, just about to shed his skin. More about that when we talk about snakes. But here is a snake skin, here's a snake slough. Regardless of species, well, this is a grass snake, but regardless of that, you can tell it's a snake and not a slow worm because you're looking at the belly there, and it's got one scale going across the span of the whole belly, different to the scalation of the dorsal surface, which you can see top left in the middle where it's folded over. You can see the normal dorsal scalation there. In the case of a slow worm, it will be like that all the way through, all the way round. So slow worms are lizards and they have that scalation all the way around the belly and the dorsal surface. So they don't have that single scale spanning the belly in the case of snakes, like you can see here. So let's look a bit more at the reptiles ecology. So what am I talking about ecology? Basically, relationships between animals and their environment. There's some examples there we're going to look at. So we've looked at that with amphibians already. Let's have a look at it for reptiles. Just recap on amphibians, the differences. So amphibians function according to the temperature. Okay, they become dormant when it gets really cold. They have permeable skins, and that's a key difference to reptiles. Totally reliant on water bodies to breed in. Reptiles don't need that. Feed mainly on invertebrates. Similar with reptiles, snakes feed on vertebrates as well. Amphibians spend the majority of their lives on land, whereas reptiles spend virtually all their entire lives on land. Snakes, grass snakes will go for a swim to catch the odd frog, but they're not aquatic like an amphibian. So reptiles, different story. Reptiles are ectothermic. So amphibians are too, but because reptiles are far more active with what they do, they really need to get out there in the sun. So ectothermic means you're entirely reliant on an external heat source. Okay. I like this picture. It's a picture of three recently deposited juvenile common lizards. One on the right has already lost the tip of its tail, but there's another reason why I like this. You can see what lizard poop looks like. You can see the lizard poo there on the right. So that's really useful to know what it looks like. It's got that little white cap, calcium at the end. And if you go out looking for reptiles and the sun goes behind the clouds or you haven't got the right weather condition, if you spot little droppings like that on obvious basking sites like rocks and logs and things that hold heat, then you know it's worth coming back again to try again later. So ectothermic as opposed to endothermic like we are. So you hear people say cold-blooded. Now, cold-blooded isn't really a very accurate term because due to various situations where I've had to handle reptiles, sometimes with translocations and things or scientific studies, catching reptiles for people like the Zoological Society of London to test them for genetics, etc. When I've had to do that, I feel the animals in my hands and describe them as being cold is just totally inaccurate. When they are charged up, their blood isn't cold. When they're charged up, their blood's warmer than ours. So it's really inaccurate to say cold-blooded. Ectothermic is the term. Reliant on an external heat source, but capable of reaching very high temperatures, having warm blood. Okay. They don't produce their own heat internally, of course. And their whole functioning really is focused on ectothermy. Okay. And because they live in Wales, they've really got to choose where they hang out. So the reptile habitat requirement's a bit more complex than amphibians. So they need open areas for basking, thermoregulation in close proximity to a complex complex vegetation structure. Okay, if we've got that as well as varied topography, undulations, banks, that kind of thing, combined with a diverse vegetation structure, different ages and heights, then that can be ideal for reptiles because it provides microhabitats. Microhabitats provide everything that they need, and it's not just reptiles that benefit from this. Invertebrates also pretty much need the same thing. A range of basking opportunities, shelter from predators, shelter from wind, an abundance of prey. This is one people don't think about. Even in the UK, it does happen. Opportunities to cool down in humid, deeper vegetation when the weather is hot and dry. So a reptile, although in Wales, it generally spends most of its time trying to warm up, it can overheat, even in this country. Okay, so they need that fact to be factored into their habitat as well. Most presentations you see, or I've seen in the past about reptiles and amphibians, unfortunately tends to be all focused on English habitats and experiences down there. I've tried to keep this Wales relevant. Here's some classic Welsh reptile habitat. This is in Pembrokeshire, coastal vegetated cliff habitat in Pembrokeshire, south-facing aspect, nothing too tall, shading, leggy little straggly patches of gorse interspersed with bracken and tussocky grasses, ant hills, all kinds of complex variations in both the topography and the vegetation structure. Okay, lots of opportunities, not just one single height vegetation situation. This is Torfaen, elsewhere in Wales, undulating terrain, heather, nothing taller than a metre. Same thing going on in sand dunes. Hibernation is an important factor. So here's an adder on emergence. You can see snow on the ground. Adders are tough. As long as they select their little microclimates, microhabitats, which might be right next to snow like that, they've found a sheltered spot there which catches the sun, then they can start to develop a viable sperm before the females emerge. And they need to do that by exposing themselves to UV for quite some time upon emergence. They might hibernate singly or communally. Now, communal hibernacles are critical features for reptiles, and they can get damaged quite often whilst occupied, which is disastrous. Now, this is something that happens in England. It happens a lot. This is done inadvertently by the good guys. This is done by a conservation NGO who shall remain nameless, and the completely flattened adder hibernacular whilst occupied. They're often not that dramatic a habitat feature, and people don't realize they're there. And if it's not seen, it's not thought about. Even just removal of vegetation cover from a hibernation site is dangerous. So in the first instance, if you're doing stuff with heavy machinery, it might collapse everything beneath and kill the animals while they're in there. Second instance, if you're more gentle, but you remove the vegetation, when the animals emerge from hibernation, they're slow and dopey and they're completely exposed to predation. So that's pretty disastrous too. So we need to try and identify what hibernation sites look like, where they are, and we do that with seasonally appropriate survey. Now here's an adder hibernation site, a naturally occurring adder hibernation site in Caerphilly. Nothing to write home about, seemingly, but you can see it's got south-facing aspect, which gives it thermal momentum. It heats up really quickly. That's why we put our solar panels at an angle. You've got thermal momentum. Okay, so you can see there's bracken there, some leggy bits of gorse, both species that everybody wants to eradicate and get rid of. We don't want to see monocultures of bracken or gorse either, but we don't want to eradicate it completely because when it's in patchy situations like this, it's very valuable. So the gorse root structures create all kinds of opportunities for cracks and fissures below ground so that things like adders and lizards can squeeze down there and get below the frost line. And it's raised on a bank, so it's flood proof too. Okay, you can see there's bracken there. Well, at this time of the year when they emerge, it's not going to shade them. Later on in the summer, they won't be there. They will have moved elsewhere. But in the spring, an emergence, it's bathed in sunlight. Okay, Here's a young adder at that very spot. Here's another example in upland heathland in Blorange. Okay, similar thing going on, different plant species. Floristically, it doesn't matter what the species is, it's the structure. Okay, doesn't matter if it's marram, heather, bramble, whatever it is, Molinia, as long as it's the structure that supports reptiles, good root structures for them to burrow into, nothing getting higher than a meter, and patchy bare patches in between it. Here's one closer to home beneath But Talbot. Again, right along that fence line, you see the adders basking and the grass tussocks, but they hibernate in the root systems of the hedgerow. So again, when they emerge in the early spring, there's no leaves on the trees to shade it. Later on in the year, when the leaves are covered in leaves, the trees are covered in leaves, they will move elsewhere. Here's some adders at that very site. They're not easy to spot, but they're sat there right close to the track. Okay. Basking, this lizard is using some warmed up slate in Ceredigion to get heat, pre-warmed heat, both from below on his tummy as well as from above at the same time. In these situations, you'll see a lot of animals. There's one there, another. There's 5 here altogether. The last one's really hard to spot because it's facing the camera. But that kind of situation, lizards will take advantage of in number. Mosaic basking's cryptic when you see just a part of the animal on display, not all of it. You can train your eyes to spot these animals. Thermoregulation beneath objects, more commonly utilized by slow worms who prefer to do that than bask openly. Breeding upon emergence from hibernation, that tends to happen before feeding, especially with snakes. You've got a pair, a male mate guarding a female there. Common lizards mating. I like this picture because it demonstrates the diversity in color. You've got a very green male there and a very tan colored female. Feeding tends to come after that. This is a sand lizard quaffing down a damselfly. Most of our British reptiles are viviparous. That means they're live bearing, avoiding laying eggs in this cold climate. You might be forgiven for thinking that's the mother. It's not, it's a male. How can I tell? He's got a very short torso and a bulge at the base of his tail. That could be the mother. That's a female. She's got a much longer torso. See the gap from her front legs to her back legs is much longer. That's because she has to carry youngsters. We have 2 egg-laying species, the grass snake and the sand lizard. The sand lizard occupies habitats where the sandy substrate enables it to incubate eggs in the sand. The grass snakes have to seek different places to which to deposit their eggs. Here, in this instance, a heap of failed silage bales. Okay. There's lots of threats against amphibians and reptiles development, spreading salt on roads when amphibians are crossing them, pesticides, big agriculture, toads getting squashed on roads, diseases, introduced pathogens, introduced alien predators. It goes on and on. Adder vigilantes, etc. It's quite depressing stuff. There's lots of nails in the coffin. We do our best to alleviate that with lots of habitat creation. This is me and a gang of friends in the Vale of Glamorgan last spring, halfway through creating some ponds. This pond, we were really careful where we put it in relation to other established ponds, and we got it all done under license of NRW. I'm really pleased to say we surveyed this pond a month after it was created, just out of interest. It was a month after it was created, so it's just a big muddy hole. There in the picture is halfway through creation, it's nowhere near finished, but it's just this big muddy hole, no plants or anything. We found all 3 species of newts in it, so they do take advantage very quickly of habitat creation and manipulation if it's done at the right time of year in the right place. Lots of it going on all over the place. These are all pictures taken in the winter when we do the work. I'm not going to bang on about pond creation here, but very briefly, shallows are really important. That is the most biodiverse area of a pond, and a lot of designs, garden centre inspired pond designs, they don't allow for that. We call it the drawdown zone. We want an extensive drawdown zone to allow for fluctuating seasonal water levels. And as you can see there, wide drawdown zone, when it drops down, it leaves lots of puddles stranded on the edge, which is fantastic for other invertebrate species, particularly damselflies, etc. We dig bigger ponds. This is one in process for toads in Carmarthenshire. Toads don't read the books about being site faithful. Here's toads bred there within 4 weeks of its creation. As you can see, no plants there at all. They had to feed on algae, but toads bred there in number straight away. They don't read the books at all. They need help with road crossings. This male, you can see his stance there. He's deliberately stopped in what to him is perceived as a vantage point, open habitat to spot females on the way to the pond and jump on them and get a free lift. So he's not even trying to cross the road. He's standing, possibly facing the wrong direction, deliberately standing up high like that, scanning, looking for females. So that's not great on the road, is it? So they need a lot of help with this. There you go, a bucket full of toads. Pond restoration as well as creation. Now, this is how a lot of ponds end up in Wales if unmanaged. We haven't got any beavers. We haven't got any, well, natural processes and natural factors are so severely disrupted now. Leaving things to nature generally doesn't really work. We have to intervene from time to time. So this is what a pond looks like in Monmouthshire if you don't do anything to it. Closer look, the occasional shopping trolley, nothing very exciting because it's so shaded. We wade in there like this and a bit like that. You can see we've left high stumps there. That's because that gives leverage for appropriately timed in the depths of winter when the impact would be minimal. A digger can pull them out. Here it is, nearly finished, bathed in sunlight, left some of the original vegetation on the right, and that will just explode when the spring approaches. And we always get loads of frogs taking advantage of stuff like that almost instantly. Lots more community engagement, trying to raise awareness, all kinds of positive things we can do, lots of training, lots of education, fraternizing and hobnobbing with celebrities, that kind of stuff, making literature, awareness raising literature, pump out a lot of this stuff as well. Influencing the management of adder sites. This is really important. As we said earlier on with the hibernation stuff, inappropriate adder habitat management. We're finding, thankfully, we're getting a lot more work helping people in this kind of way. Yeah, lots of monitoring contracts to do this spring for various different clients, RSPB, wildlife trusts, local authorities, etc. And it's good that they're really coming on board with that. We did the Adder Attitude campaign, also got help with Chris Packham and Yola Williams with that. Some of my friends involved in creating egg-laying sites for grass snakes, creating sand patches for sand lizards in fixed dune situations. We also look at non-natives, so xenopus toads, disease-carrying vectors. They were in the Vale of Glamorgan. We don't think they're there anymore. Midwife toad, Llandrudnod Wales, pretty harmless so far, not causing any issues. Wall lizard, we've got them on the Gower. They don't seem to be causing any issues because they're quite isolated. It's not good where they can rub shoulders with sand lizards. More about that in another presentation. And alpine newt. Now, that's not good news. We've got them in Ceredigion, a really strong colony. That bottle trap is just full of them, as you can see. There's thousands of them there. They have all tested positive for chytridiomycosis, which is a pretty scary fungal pathogen, so that's not great news. We do a lot of contract work for NRW, Welsh Government, local authorities, NGOs, all kinds of people, the MOD even. What do we get up to? It's normally about habitat management, surveys and evidence reports. So here's one we did for NRW regarding sand lizards on Newborough Warren. That was really interesting. And I get at that point to get away from the stressy side of it and do some surveying and just chill out by myself out with reptiles. But as much as I'm looking at them, they're often watching me, as you can see the sand lizard here. And generally what I find with them is I pick up from them, we need to chill out. We need to take a leaf out of their book. Take this animal, for example. There's a sand lizard using a cobweb hammock. Okay, I photographed him. I sat still watching them for a while. This is up at Ynys Las. You can see he's got some scars on his face. He's had a punch up with a rival. And you can see his ear, the hole for his ear is huge, much bigger than the common lizard. Now, these animals are called Lacerta agilis, and I think that's a misnomer because they're not as agile as a common lizard. They're relatively squat and short-legged compared to a common lizard. So I don't know why they're called agilis, but I think they need bigger ears. They've got really good hearing because they're less agile. That's why I think they've got such good hearing. But there he is on his cobweb hammock. I've gone backwards. There we go. And here he is again, fully stretched out on his cobweb hammock. And from that vantage point, he was spying down on other lizards. And where I was sat, he was just going on about his business. I had a good view. Saw one smaller male walk out in front of him down below. He left his hammock, chased him off, and came back and crawled back into his hammock, looking very happy. So yeah, we need to be chilled out like the lizards are. That's it. Thanks for listening. If you got any questions, fire away.
That was fab. Thank you so much, Pete. Really great introduction there. I'm looking forward to the rest of the series. The only comment I would have is that as somebody with an aversion to spiders, a cobweb hammock does not sound relaxing to me. It sounds like a traumatic experience. We have a question in the chat from Sandra. She says, "Hi Pete, are you able to say a bit about, I'm going to butcher this, Asclepian snakes in Wales, please? ID and where they are found, if there are wild populations."
There's two populations that we know of in the UK. One of them is down in London, and I've observed them there myself. And you can find them along a stretch of the canal through Camden Lock. And don't look on the ground, look up in bushes. They tend to be up off ground in bushes because they're rat snakes and they eat things like birds and squirrels and stuff. They're also in the grounds of the London Zoo. I wonder how they got there. And then the other population, surprise, surprise, is in and around the Welsh Mountain Zoo in North Wales. There's another population there, and we know more about that of late because a friend of mine's been doing quite a detailed study there. I don't think they're currently posing a great deal of threat to anything, really. They like to eat rats and grey squirrels. Crack on, is what I say. When my friend was doing some surveying in North Wales in the early days, at some point one was put in a bucket with a grass snake, and then when they emptied the bucket, there was just one fat Asclepian snake and no grass snake. So they can protect grass snakes, but again, like the picture of the newts, being in the confines of a bucket is not exactly a natural situation. So I think in the wild situation, the grass snake's got a good chance of evading a hungry Asclepian snake, which is more likely to be living up to its name. It's a rat snake, eating rats, pigeons, grey squirrels, that kind of stuff. So yeah, we've got two colonies of them in the UK currently.
Thanks, Pete. Ta.
Do we have any other questions?
I have
Hi.
a couple.
Go on, yeah.
You always do. You were showing a lovely picture of a snake that shed its skin. How are you able to tell which type of snake it is?
It's really easy when you flip it over if it's in good condition. If it's in really good condition, you can see everything. If it's a grass snake, you can see the collar patterns, etc. Adder is really distinctive with its zigzag, so even if you've only got a small section of it, you can normally pick out a bit of zigzag. Snooze snake you don't have to worry about in Wales, but they're also pretty distinctive. Once you know the patterns, once you get used to seeing the animals, you don't have any doubt in your mind because you just see it repeated basically on the slough, if that makes any sense.
It does. And my other one was, sorry, Vanilla, shut up. When is the best time to actually dig a pond?
In most situations in the winter, when you've got the least impact on the majority of species. However, if you're digging a pond right in the middle of a lawn, you're not really going to have any impact, especially if you keep the grass cut short. So you could dig a pond at any time of the year if it's in the middle of a lawn or something like that, because what are you going to disturb? Not a great deal.
Thank you.
Melissa? You're on mute. I'm not sure if there you go.
Oh, We have about 20 acres of millennia dominated land, bracken areas as well. All of it is south facing. We know we have adders. Is there any kind of telltale signs of what to look for if you're just kind of generally looking out for where hibernacular are? Anything that makes you go, oh, that's going to be one? Because for us, if we just say it's south facing and it's got this habitat, that's potentially 20 acres. So I'm wondering if there's anything more that we can maybe look out for.
You saw a few pictures of naturally occurring habitat, hibernacular in various different habitat situations, but there was a common theme amongst them, and that was an obvious bank, an obvious change in the topography. It might be a ditch, it might be a bank, it might be like a hummock or a bomb hole or something like that. Any obvious change. If you haven't got obvious changes in topography, then look for mature plants that will have mature root structures. The root structures are what create the opportunities to get below the ground. And also, your survey needs to be seasonally appropriate. So basically, the first sunny, if you've got 10 degrees, the first sunny mornings, doesn't matter if it's in February. Actually, before I say that, I've got photographs of adders basking every month of the year. I've got photographs of adders basking on Boxing Day, January the 1st, you name it. If it's warm enough, they will come out, just the males. They will come out because they're getting ahead of the game. They're literally just on the doorstep. Remember, there's not any effort involved. It's just the equivalent of sitting in your front porch kind of thing. So they will come out if there's enough sun and UV. They will come out in order to help speed up the process of developing viable sperm for when the females emerge. So seasonally appropriate survey for you anytime from now on, basically, when the sun comes out. So I would say late February, early March, look at likely spots. If you find a reptile during March and April, it is at its hibernation site. And then you might not find it there again later on in the year when it's probably dispersed. So I would look at variations in your topography. I'd look at plants with mature root structures. And I would keep it seasonally appropriate and take advantage of the time of year. So we'll go into more detail with another presentation in the future, but emergence surveys, it's quite social hours because it doesn't get warm enough for them till about 10 o'clock. So you can have a lie in and you go looking for them at 10 o'clock, they might be out. And because you've got this short window before it gets cool again, they're out all day until about 2:30. Later on in the spring, it gets warmer and then it splits up into two separate survey periods. They're out in the morning, then it gets too warm. They don't need to bask, and then they're out at the end of the day. But at emergence time, it's easy. You only need to get there for 10 o'clock till about 2 and take some sandwiches with you and just scan obvious spots like that. If it comes to it and you're getting frustrated, give us a shout and we'll get some nerds to assist you. There you go.
That'd be amazing. Thank you very much for your help. Thank you.
No worries.
Lovely. We have another question in the chat. What is the best vegetation to plant in a small brackets 1,000-litre pond for amphibians?
People will say to anything native. I'd go a step further than that. I'd say not anything native. Make sure it's native, but only certain species. For example, you don't want water lilies and reed mace, which are native, in a tiny little pond because it will just fill it up really, really quickly. So there's some really good native aquatic nurseries online. I'd say, depending on how deep your pond is, you could have hornwort, which likes deepish water. Not ridiculously deep, but it needs a good depth. Hornwort, you just need to throw a lump of it in the middle and it will sort itself out. That's a really good oxygenator. And with me at the garden pond at home, it made the water like vodka once it was established. It's lovely. it dies off in the winter and you think it's all died, but then it just comes back in the spring. So hornwort's a good oxygenator, good native oxygenator. Please avoid things like Canadian pondweed, that kind of stuff. But then you've got marginal plants that stay at a nice small size, such as water forget-me-not. That's a superb plant. It has two different types of leaves, and the submerged leaves, newts like to attach their eggs to them and fold them over the eggs. And it's got beautiful flowers as well. Marsh marigolds are good, one to have around the edges. Water crowfoot is a superb one to have around the edges. And to be honest, in a small pond, what I've just described, that's enough. That's enough. I will say, if you're getting them online, make sure you wash and rinse them beforehand, just in case there's any duckweed in it. Some growers are less scrupulous than others, and if you've got the tiniest bit of duckweed in it, you will deeply regret it in a small pond. So just take the extra time to check them over first. Give them a rinse down with a shower head or something. It doesn't matter if it's tap water. Honestly, they'll recover. And then chuck them in your pond. They're hard. They're tough. Okay. But those species, they don't get too big. And that's a good combination of plants. It's all you need, really. It's all you need in there.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I can speak from first-hand experience. Make sure you wash them, because I didn't. And now I have duckweed in my pond. It's very sad. I have a quick question if we've got time. We've only got 5 minutes left, so if people need to rush off, that's okay. But I was just wondering, oh, hang on, I'll let Peter ask his question first. What triggers the emergence of reptiles?
Bit of sunshine. Decent bit of sunshine. And that's it. Warmth. Simple as that.
Have they got sort of an annual, rhythm, or is it literally a temperature change that triggers it?
It's the temperature change.
Yeah.
You just, the years, especially lately, the years are so different. So last year, March was like May, and I've got photographs. I would use sand lizard as an example because they're extreme sun lovers, and they're normally more delayed to the other species. I got photographs taken last year on April the 4th of them courting and breeding, which is ridiculous. That's ridiculously early. That's because March was like your average May last year. Everything was ahead. The year before that, I didn't see a single reptile for the whole of March because it was absolutely rubbish. So it just varies considerably. So the year before, we had a late start. Last year we had an early start. Who can tell what's going to happen this spring? It's, the best thing to do is look out the window, look at the weather, and judge it like that.
We've got 2 more questions now. Jane is asking, when putting out reptile refugia like corrugated sheets, do they need to be positioned south facing?
Yeah, this is something that we'll go into detail with on the survey section.
Fine.
Otherwise, we'll get tied up into that. There will be a presentation particularly all about that.
Well, you'll have to come to that session then, Jane. And Peter's asked sort of a follow-up question. What triggers amphibians to begin breeding?
Same thing, but not to the same extreme as reptiles, just mild conditions. So when the freezing weather stops, or if it even starts, when the freezing weather stops, they're off. So frogs have spawned everywhere, all over the place already. I was on a site visit on Monday, and there was frog spawn that was probably a fortnight old, all over the place. And then we found some that had actually hatched out. There's actually tadpoles. This is Monday this week. Great crested newts have been in the water since December at various sites. I saw palmate newts in the water on Monday. It's just mild conditions, basically, and then they're on the move. We've had frogs breeding in December regularly down in Cornwall for some time now. I don't think there's a single day in the calendar year when there aren't newts in a pond somewhere in the UK. It's all very different now, but yeah, end of freezing temperatures, bit of rain, amphibians are then on the move to their ponds. As simple as that.
Fab. Right, well, I'll save my question for another time, I think.
You go for it if you want to. Go for it.
Well, I was just going to ask, those pictures of you when you were building those big ponds, do you plant them up at all, or do you just let nature take over and say whatever will show up shows up?
If you speak to any herpetologist or any ecologist into freshwater habitats, if you speak to the Freshwater Habitats Trust, for example, who we work closely with, their advice is, with the exception of possibly garden ponds, their advice is to just leave it alone. Dig a hole, walk away. And I've got quite a bit of first-hand experience to say how that goes, and obviously better on some sites than others. Some sites it's phenomenal, other sites it takes a while, but it always happens by itself. People think they're being helpful, chucking stuff in, and quite often it's a disaster. Just leave it happen, and it does happen. We've got a seed bank all over the place. If you dig in a pond, a natural pond that doesn't need lining, if you're digging it in a kind of area that wants to be wetland, you don't have to do anything at all. You just create the shallow edges, extensive drawdown zones, and that will enable a much more floristic diversity, because most plants need that shallow water. The deeper water's too cold. So sunlit shallows, and just walk away and it will happen itself.
Yeah, fab, perfect, thank you. I was just curious as to whether you did any planting, but I suppose the main thing you need to do is pull up any Himalayan balsam.
Well, we try not to dig ponds where there's Himalayan balsam, to be
Yeah,
honest.
fair. Wise. There we are. Well, that's 7:30 on the dot. So thank you so much, Pete. That was fab. Yeah, everybody who has joined us tonight, thank you for coming. And I hope that you're able to make it to the rest of the sessions, because I think they're going to be great. So yeah, thanks very much. And see you all next week, hopefully.